October iteration of Language Matters. I'm Tom Gardner, everyone knows me, I'm Tom Gardner, the director of the Texas Language Center and a faculty member in the Department of Slavic and Eurasian Studies. I'm loving our last now year and a half, getting close to 2 years of having our, especially our current graduate students and their brilliant faculty project organizers, designers, be presenting at our Language Matters. It has turned out to be what started, I think, is almost an act of desperation, saying we really just need some new voices. All of us have been giving the same talks for the last years. We needed some new, fresh faces that we said, well, let's try our grad students, and it's turned out to be, you all, most sitting around the table have done this, have been some of our most, well, our strongest voices in pedagogy, and also real promise for what's coming down the road. I don't want to waste any time to get to this great talk because we have today two of our superstars from already our Department of French and Italian, especially because now in the French. Oh, stop what is all this false modesty? Come on. I've never seen a French person not love being told you're the best. Never met one. Never met one.
But they pretend.
Yes, pretend. False modesty. We are fortunate today to have Dr. Patricia Kyle, who has a wonderful, like the work she does in hybrid technology, has a hybrid identity here. She's done in the past brilliant work for us through LATES, the Liberal Arts and Instructional Technology Services, and now is housed in French and Italian, working on this incredible project with our current graduate student in French, in particular, Maxence Leconte. Max has been almost all of our, a student in almost all of our, that is the Applied Linguist coursework here at UT, and is now what would I call this, co-developing, authoring?
Oh, he's doing everything.
You're just watching. This wonderful project we're going to get to hear about today in the talk called Going Global,
Okay.
Beyond the Four Walls of the Language Classroom. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Pat Kyle and Max Leconte. Go for it, guys.
All right. So I get to start. So what we're going to be talking about today, first of all, is, hold on, there, a project that we designed and implemented back a year, well, the design started in 2017, and then we actually implemented it in spring of 2018. So it's been about a year now, maybe longer, and this was a project intended to link students of French 317C, which is a high intermediate level course, directly with students studying English in France at the University of Grenoble. Okay. I want to point out that there are some other participants who are not amongst us today, unfortunately. Those include Rose Potter, who actually set up the relationship between UT Austin and Grenoble, which is what got us sort of in the door there, as well as my two colleagues at the Université de Grenoble, Coralie Ficot and Christiane Coulin. And then, of course, we had support from UT's International Office and the Faculty Innovation Center as part of the Global Classrooms Initiative, and from the Texas Language Center, we supported the purchase of some technology that we very much needed for this project. So we're very pleased and hope that you are pleased with your investment. Okay, so today what we're going to do is just walk you through 3 stages of this project. The first is planning, okay, and I'll talk to you about that because that was mainly where my role was. The second was implementation, because Max ended up being the instructor of record for the course and actually had to walk the students through the entire project for the semester. Wasn't planned, but that's the way it turned out. And then finally we'll talk about outcomes both from the perspective of the instructors and designers of the project and from the perspective of the students. So how did this all get started? Well, we started with the Global Classrooms Initiative grant, which allowed us to collaborate both in person and face-to-face through Skype with our, what we call them partners, our global classroom partners in France. So we started in the winter, spring of winter 2016, 2017, is that right?
Correct.
Yeah, with our online communications. Then Rose and I traveled to Lyon and met with our colleagues there. So we planned out most of this face-to-face in a hotel room because it was the only air-conditioned space. And it was godly hot that day, that whole week. So we, we just did what we had to do. We worked together to create a proposal. We also had two main strategies in mind. We wanted to promote multilingual communication for our students, and we wanted also to our students to have direct intercultural interaction. And by direct, we meant not through textbooks, not through videos, but actually talking to real people. Okay? So in order, now I have to put in a little word here. You may think, okay, so you're going to put some UT Austin students in contact with some French students, and that sounds like a pretty simple thing. You just get them all some computers and let them go. As it turns out, it was not quite that simple. As some of you are familiar, all of you would be familiar with some of the requirements of a higher educational institution like the one in which we work. Imagine taking into account that environment and then adding to that the complexity of working with yet another institution in another culture. So there were a few, issues that we had to navigate. But we decided that we needed to set very clear, simple learning objectives for the students and then see what we needed to do to make that happen. So the first thing we wanted to do was facilitate meaningful communication. That means different things to different people, okay? And so what we decided was we would define this as the students interacting with other people, our students interacting with French students and vice versa, on meaningful topics that cause them to have to use both languages, French and English in this case, and to negotiate meaning and to talk about meaningful topics, not just like what you had for breakfast this morning or your favorite color or what kind of music you like, okay? So that was the first part. The second thing was we wanted to promote intercultural awareness. Hello. And what we mean by that is we wanted the students to see the other cultures, if you will, through the eyes of the natives of those cultures. So we didn't want the students, we didn't want to project our view of American culture to French people. We wanted the students themselves to project their own views, to add that authenticity to the experience. And so the same happened from the perspective of the French students. And the way we did this was by creating videos. The students went out and created videos on 4 different cultural topics, and they exchanged those with videos from the French students. So we chose, for example, the first topic I believe was food. So the American students made, and you'll get to see an example of this in a minute, made videos having to do with their favorite foods, things that they like to eat and where they like to go to eat, that sort of thing. The French people did the same thing, then we exchanged them. Okay? So one thing that was very important is we wanted the American students to make their videos in English, and the French students then would have to interpret American culture through English. And we wanted to do the same in the other direction. The French students would make their own videos in French, and then our students had to interpret the French directly, okay? So they were learning culture through their target language, I guess is what I'm trying to say. We also had to respect course content and requirements because we were in an academic setting. So we couldn't add a lot of new work to the students' workload here in, say, French 317C because they would revolt and we would probably get in like huge trouble, right? But we also, out of respect for them, we wanted the content of the course to be taken into account, and we wanted their academic requirements to be respected. And so what we did was we paid attention to the ACTFL guidelines that were appropriate for speech at the intermediate level in French. We paid attention to, I was going to bring a copy and I forgot, of the textbook that we use that has the cultural topics that we cover typically in the French 317C course. So those were the topics that we used for their videos and for their conversations. And then we also paid attention to their workload so that they typically at the end of a lesson or chapter made a recording into the computer that was assessed as a oral, what would you call it, oral exam sort of thing. And so we just took that out and substituted real conversation in its place. So, we just basically tried to integrate it easily into the course. And finally, we wanted to encourage student responsibility for learning. And this was required really for this project for 2 reasons. One, we We knew that the students were going to have to manage the making of their videos and the exchange of videos with their French partners. And we also knew that they were going to have to be responsible for setting up their own online conversations. We couldn't do that for them. And Max will tell you a little bit more about how that actually played out in just a second. So how did we go about this? So we had online and in-person communication between the faculty team there and the faculty team here. We worked together to create appropriate documents to support the students through all the different stages of the process. We demonstrated technological elements with the students. We used Skype. We showed them how to record using Skype. We used Zoom with Slack. We tried different things to see what worked best. And then lastly, we conducted two post-experiment surveys. One was right after the course was finished and the project was over in May of 2018. And then the other we did 4 months later, same exact survey, to see what their feelings were after they'd been away from the course for a while. And you know, just to kind of get a perspective when they weren't so quite stressed at the end of the semester and that sort of thing. Okay, so that takes care of the planning stage. Now I'm going to turn it over to Max, who's going to talk to you about how this actually played out on the ground.
Okay, so I'm really excited to be here, so thank you very much. And I want to begin by saying thank you to Pat for bringing me in this project about 1.5 years ago when I was still a young graduate student and a teacher in progress, which I still am today. He really helped me realize the importance of pedagogy in and outside of the classroom and how easy it was to integrate the use of technology also in the way we teach. And I also want to say thank you to Tom for inviting us and talk about this topic, which is hopefully arresting and stimulating for all of you. So, before I begin, my role in today's presentation is very much the same role I occupied 1.5 years ago when we had the project. It is one to walk you through the practical implication of creating your own global classroom. But as to say, I want to hand you the tools to eventually recreate this on your own, give you a practical sense of how to do it. And as such, just at the same time we did the experiment, I consider myself the smooth operator, the mediator. I had little to do with the whole design of it. I just make sure that everything would run perfectly well for both ourselves and of course for the students, right? So I'll begin by giving you an overview of what we have called the 4 stages of the global classroom. And before I begin here by telling you a bit more about this, I want to make sure to emphasize that we tried our best to implement the 4 skills that you typically find in a language classroom: reading, writing, listening, and of course speaking. I may forget to talk about those in detail in each of the stages, but hopefully you get a good sense of how this worked out in practice, right? Before getting into more detail, the first stage was what we call the question stage. At the very beginning of the project, knowing that we already had an instructor abroad here in the US, the 2 instructors concerted and decided to ask one common question to their students here and abroad. That question I'll get into more detail again about it in a second, but broad enough of a question. And the point of this was for the students to answer by recording themselves. In our group, we had students record themselves into pairs for about 3 to 4 minutes, and I'll show you an example of that in a second. The second stage was the reflection stage. Having recorded the video, the students exchanged the videos and started watching it with their partners here in Texas and of course in France. And the idea was for the students to start thinking critically about the implication of that video, what they just saw and what they just listened to. Again, kind of going against the assumption or the stereotypes that they can think about typically. Something we cannot always offer in the language classroom here. So it's already a little bit beyond the 4 walls, right? Then a stage that can be both innocuous and a little bit daunting for most of us is the organization stage. That was the moment when the students get with each other and try to schedule a time to talk with their partner abroad. And that can be a bit more tricky than most people think, so we'll try to tackle how we did this the best we could. And of course, the last stage, which is the main one, little cherry on top of the cake. It was a production stage when the students met face-to-face for a given amount of minutes to exchange about what they just saw and react to the questions that they could be asked to each other. And again, there was kind of a format we tried to implement. We'll talk about how it worked and also what could have worked better. The repetition stage is not necessarily a stage in and of itself. We'll talk about it in a second too. It's about how many times you want to create new rounds for this experiment based on how much time you have ahead of you, and again, the format of your own classroom. If you have the same class for multiple semesters, multiple years, you can really keep the same partners. If you change every semester, it might be a bit more complicated. So, to begin, the first one is the stage 1 question. So the students, like I said, decide to ask one question, and for our own purpose, it was important that the question fit the moment in the course that we had. So if we're talking about leisure time, or about food culture, or about daily life, university life, it was important to kind of like mirror this so that the students felt like they were learning something that was copying what they had in the classroom, so they owned already the vocabulary to do so, and things like this. The question we always try to emphasize should be, for us at least, open-ended enough so that the question is not just a yes, no. It's supposed to kind of like promote conversation, interaction, and again, that was something that you had to agree on ahead of time with the instructor abroad. Based on the level of your classroom, we really want to stress this too. It doesn't have to be a very complicated question. It can be fairly easy questions as long as it is interesting to the students. And of course, the final stage, after the students saw the question, for us at least, they would get into pairs and try to do a small recording of themselves. Technology here was fairly easy. You can use your phone, you can use a computer, and try to be as creative as possible. So I'm going to show you 2 examples here. Hopefully it'll work, of what it looked like at the time. So there's one moment where we talked about food and what was your favorite dish, or what do you typically eat on a daily basis. So here you'll see 2 of my former students who talk about what they typically eat.
Hi,
in
my name
English.
is Victoria,
Hi, I'm Trace.
and we're going to talk about food. So my favorite foods are like donuts and burgers, pizza, and Thai food. I eat a lot of potatoes and beans. Yeah, and in an average day in the morning, I drink coffee, and maybe I'll have a granola
So they would
bar.
show to make sure to facilitate
I'll
everything.
have like a salad during lunch,
Okay.
or a burger, honestly.
So fairly easy. Again, we at this time, I think it was on the very first video we recorded, don't really know what the level of English from the other students could be. So we really try to emphasize, be creative, integrate photos to your little video, which was fairly easy too. We had a run with Rose, who is not here today, explain to students how to use technology in a very simple way. And on the other end of the spectrum, we had the French students who did the same thing at the time. So hopefully this will work.
Bonjour, c'est encore Aurélia et Sacha. Aujourd'hui, on va vous présenter une recette qu'on aime beaucoup. C'est la recette des crêpes. Donc vous avez les pancakes aux États-Unis, et nous on a les crêpes et c'est un peu différent. Donc pour faire cette recette, il faut des œufs, du lait, de la farine, un peu de sucre et de sel. Donc c'est vraiment tout simple.
Same thing.
Oh, nice.
They would show.
Donc dans un premier temps, il faut mélanger la farine, les œufs, le sucre. C'est tout. Donc on mélange bien, après on rajoute le lait.
Okay. Just in case, it's still very helpful. Should use this in my current class right now. Okay, so let's go back. So that worked pretty well. And now that we had the videos that we exchanged with students, sometimes the instructor will be the one, of course, pairing the students abroad with the students here in Texas. We had the reflection stage, and that stage was truly critical because we see a number of concepts, grammatical, cultural, in the lesson, in the classroom, and of course, sometimes what they see in the video can change everything that they thought or believed at the time. So, for example, they can find something a bit more interesting that they didn't think about, a bit more surprising or shocking. The goal here is really to kind of like push the boundaries of knowledge that they can only get when they're in the classroom through one single instructor, right? Here, everyone kind of like becomes both a student and a teacher at the same time, which is quite interesting because it's not something that you can acquire very easily in a normal setting, right? At that point, the students who have watched the video, and again, pairs, will draft about 4 to 5 questions to kind of further the conversation. Ask like, why do you eat crepes? When do you eat crepes normally? Or things like this, which again, can be entirely based on what they saw. They can also say like, I don't like crepes, why do you like crepes? It was just about to, the point was to stimulate a conversation that would be interesting for them, right? So, to continue. Moving on to the organization stage. And this is the stage we wish we had done sometimes a bit differently, but again, I think we handled it pretty well. It was all about the instructor task to really make sure that the students would not realize this was sort of a burden on them. So we tried multiple techniques using technology, Doodle, Slack, but also realized that sometimes a direct exchange would work better for them because immediate spontaneous conversation can really solve most of the anxiety of scheduling a thing. And one thing that we also had to think ahead of time was managing time difference. Of course, between Texas and France, there's 7 hours, and there are a lot of things that go into this too, especially when we're talking about this in a second, when you have non-traditional students who have to take care of family time afterwards, especially in France, or who are busy during the weekend. How do you think about those things? So typically, one round would last about 2.5, 3 weeks, and we tended to wait until that third moment to kind of schedule the time when we may have done it differently and schedule it from the very beginning to give enough time for the students to kind of like think, in 2.5 weeks from now, I'm gonna have to talk to these people, right? So that's something that we worked on. We really had to get extra guidance from the instructor at that point, not just here, but also in France. It's about managing expectations. We really wanted to make sure that both the instructor in France and in the US communicate really well ahead of time. That was crucial because sometimes, we'll talk about this too, students in France did not get a response from their own instructor. So they'll come to me and say like, okay, when am I supposed to talk? I was like, well, do this, do that. Try to make it as smooth as possible. Make them forget that they're using technology. It's supposed to be very, very fluid and transparent here. Do you have a question?
I did about the reflection stage, but maybe we can
Okay,
talk about this
Come back
at the
later.
end.
That's
Sorry.
It's okay. And then finally, the production stage. So, assuming everything went well and they decided on the time, the students meet online, typically using, at the end of the day, Zoom. That was the preferred option for us because you had a recording function built into Zoom. So it was really good for assessment, which is something that for us was important. For French students maybe less, but for us it was critical, especially towards the end. So we tried to make it a two-step process, and it was very much ad hoc and spontaneous. When the students would meet online, they would decide, okay, we are going to start by answering the questions in French. So our students would ask a question in French, receive answers in French, and go on for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then halfway through the process, when the questions have been answered really, switch and flip over questions in English and response in English. This was not always as easy as you think. Of course, you need to be very patient. There's going to be differences in level. There's going to be a lot of code switching from time to time, but this is acceptable. The goal at the end of the day is to communicate and try. And this really worked to a number of extent. I'm going to show you a little extract which hopefully you'll find interesting and funny from the same students that I just showed you a minute ago. So here we have Trace and Victoria, who are talking to Jade, the French student, who is in France in her apartment, and they're talking about daily life, right?
Yeah, voilà. Okay. And you?
So she's asking in English.
J'aime,
But you have the answer in French.
c'est coucher. Je vais coucher.
Yeah.
Je vais coucher. Aussi, j'aime les cafés. J'aime aller aux différents restaurants.
She tries really hard. We're 15 minutes into the conversation already, so.
Essayer différentes cuisines aussi. Different cuisines. I like to try different
A
cuisines.
little tight. Speaks in English, but
Et toi?
and then she asks for help in
Um,
French, which is really good.
Je vais au parc avec mon chien
And then answers in French.
d'habitude pendant le week-end.
So here we see an example where we use a lot of code switching where students don't always know the appropriate vocabulary. And just to give you a little bit of perspective, I knew these students really well. They tried really, really hard, but they're not the best students in the class by far. But they really felt involved, and they really wanted to improve their skills in speaking, culture. So it didn't really matter how well they knew French, it mattered how well they tried. And here is kind of the same thing. I really enjoyed that even when they asked a question in French afterward, the French speaker would answer in English, and kind of the same thing, try really hard to answer in English. So at the end of the day, both parties really made the most of the experiment, which is what we were looking for. Okay, now let me go back quickly to this. Okay, so moving on to the repetition part. So for our own purposes, given the fact that we had a semester, we managed to go through 4 rounds of this experiment. And the thing that we tried to do too was to switch partners abroad, to give it a maximum of emphasis on different linguistic and cultural partners and backgrounds and interfaces, which is again not something that you can get all the time in the US. So that was really important. So now, takeaways. The students do progress really, really quickly. We try to kind of like measure it, but 30 minutes of face-to-face conversation might be equivalent to roughly a week, maybe more, of speaking time or listening time when you are in a classroom here in the US. So students made exponential progress during that time, especially for 4 rounds. It was really impressive. Of course, and this is kind of like the side we tend to forget, but the students and ourselves learned a lot about how to use technology, how to be a bit more resourceful in that matter too. To improve not only the linguistic and cultural skills, but also like real life, real world skills, right? Then, of course, that demonstrated that the language do truly matter, because we're thinking ahead. They might not do this with French class or Spanish class or anything on a daily basis, but when they go onto the work, job market and everything, they might have to go on conference calls with people who are abroad, and then they've already faced this situation. They know how to deal with it in the most efficient way. Even if they don't know everything from the vocabulary to the grammar, they know how to be comfortable in trying to communicate. And in hindsight, I think that thinking back on what we could have done better, the instructor input, yes, is really crucial and critical. You have to make sure that the expectations are the same abroad and here. I think that was one of the things that we need to be very careful about, make sure that the cultural differences are understood from the very beginning. In France, for example, the concept of time is very loose. So when you say meet at 7 p.m., French students are like, yeah, 7:20 is good. When here students have to take another class at 2 p.m. and they need to be on time. So it's something that we also wanted to stress, and that I personally had to explain to the French students in France and to my students in the US. Be patient. That's also part of the learning curve that you have to deal with. And of course, we always want to keep in mind that the global classroom is testing the students far beyond just the cultural and linguistic abilities. It's testing their patience, resourcefulness. We're trying to tell them that they need to be autonomous, and these are also skills that they need to learn in the university setting. And at first, it's not always so easy for them to know. But again, this student, at least this project, we saw it as being very student-centered and therefore student-run. So we're saying, like, you have to manage your own expectations. What do you want to get out of this project that could be useful for you? And at the end of the day, they did find very, very positive things for them, and most of them were really happy, and we'll see this in a second with the survey comments and everything. It was challenging, surely, but it was also extremely rewarding for the vast majority of these students. And like we said, it didn't take all that much effort. At least for the students, the goal was to be as fluid for them, and we handled the burden of like finding better ways to make it happen and be put into practice. And of course, as long as we offer guidance, people understand what it was. So it worked out pretty well. I'm going to pass it over to Pat, who's going to talk a little bit about the outcomes and the surveys that we ran for the classroom.
Thanks, Max. I want to applaud Max myself. As a monumental task he undertook. Really. Max had in addition to running the whole thing, basically in the classroom, Max often found himself in the position of having to mediate also with the French faculty, which wasn't always as comfortable. as we might have wanted, because there were, you know, they had different styles and they had different expectations and they didn't understand our context all that well. So there was a lot of mitigation going on.
And it's not something that we expected starting the project too, is in France people don't answer email past 6 p.m. Or people don't look at their email over the weekend. And when you want to make sure that everything is organized, it is a really nice life. But it requires that little extra thing from the instructor too. And again, those are things that you need to coordinate at the very beginning of the project. And it worked out well. I mean, I think it really went well. I'm happy about it.
It worked, and that's the important thing. There were many points along the way where things could have not worked, but they did. Okay, all right, so let's talk about results. So these are 7 of the points that we asked the students to respond to. We used a Leconte scale, 5-point for, it was agree, strongly agree, neither, disagree, and strongly disagree. So I collapsed the disagrees and the agrees, and you'll see that by and large, you know, they agreed with, I learned a lot, I was enthusiastic about this, I enjoyed meeting my French partners, I enjoyed talking with them, I learned a lot about, or I learned about French culture, and I didn't say a lot. I enjoyed making the videos, and I enjoyed watching my French partners' videos. So I guess the part where we had the lowest level of agreement was here, although that's still pretty strong, 66%, right? But I think sometimes students aren't as aware at the moment of how much they're learning. So you'll see in a minute what they said 4 months later. Everything was strong here. I thought this was interesting that they enjoyed making the video. 77% agreed, but 22.22% said they did not agree, right? But then they really did enjoy watching the other videos. You know, it was just the making of their own that maybe they didn't quite appreciate as much. Okay, so now when we ran the survey again, the first time we had 18 respondents, that was all the students in the class. The second time, of course, we had only 8. Well, I just didn't say of course, but there were many students who did not respond.
And I have my own theory about this too, because I'm the one who distributed the survey. I think a number of the students in my class were upperclassmen who were junior and senior, and I think they graduated around that time. So it is very possible that they did not check their email or didn't care about responding to this afterwards, especially in September when they were probably getting started on the job or things like this.
But we're very happy with the results. So we're not complaining. No.
No.
So notice now we have no one disagreeing with any of those same topics, right? We have a few who were in the neither category, especially here with the making of the videos.
Yeah.
But then the rest, you know, they're very high. I learned a lot. I enjoyed meeting my French partners. I enjoyed talking with them. I learned about French culture, and I enjoyed watching my French partners' videos.
Sorry, but did you have any kind of qualitative data to flesh out? So what was it about making it, in particular, making the video that was so unappealing? Was it actually the technology part? Was it that they had to do the speaking?
We do have that in some of the other, I didn't bring that today. Well, I actually did bring it, but I don't have it in the slides. But yeah, there was some talk, the technology was part of it.
Okay.
The 2 things I complained most about were the technology, having to learn different technologies, which was a challenge for them, which is kind of interesting because a lot of times we think they know the technology better than we do, and it's not necessarily true. And then the second thing was the timing issue, this organizing, making sure that their French partners showed up when they said they would show up, that sort of thing. Okay, so that was that. Now, here are some of the comments from May, and I think, Tom, I think you'll especially like these. I know less French